Lord, as we look into your word this morning, I pray, Father, that it would be simplified, clarified, and bring encouragement and strength to your people. And Lord, I pray that you would take these lives of ours and continue to work in us to will and do your good pleasure. And we trust ourselves into your care. In Jesus' name, amen. You know, I'm glad that God decided to create people like you and me. And I'm glad that he revealed himself to us. You know, he didn't have to do that, but he did. And I'm glad that he makes his nature and his ways known to us when we draw near to him. And to learn of the Lord requires some time. Example, I know my wife pretty well. We've been around one another for a number of years. Some of you that have been around her, you know her too, but not as well as I do. So, revealing himself requires time. It requires a willing heart on the other person's part. And it requires walking together. Matthew 11:28 says that, come to me, Jesus says, all of you that are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And take my yoke upon you and learn from me. And he also, that word means learn from me and learn of me. So as we come and we take his yoke and walk with him, we learn of him. Now, God wanted to reveal himself to mankind, so he chose a man, Abraham, and his descendant, Isaac, and then Jacob, and then the 12 sons of Jacob. So he took a man, and then he took a family, and he turned the family into a nation of people, and he desired to reveal himself to the world through this nation of people. And now we are a nation of people. We are a royal priesthood, like the Israelites were. We are a royal priesthood, his church. And so God is revealing himself through the nation of Israel and also through his church as well. And we've been reading about that as we've been going through Exodus. And I want you to turn there again this morning. And we're going to go back and pick it up in Exodus chapter 2. Beginning in verse 11. Let's look. Moses, it says, one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were, and he watched them at their hard labor. So Moses, you'll remember, the people went into Egypt because of the famine. All the Israelites were there. The family of Jacob. And 350 years passed. They were looking at Exodus now, not Genesis. 350 years have passed. And now they're a nation of people. There's between 2 to 3 million of them. And Moses is touched by God. God is going to do something through this man. And so Moses, at the age of 40, it says one day Moses had grown up. One day after he'd grown up, at 40, he went out to where his own people were. And he watched them at their hard labor. Now, it says where his own people were. Now, he was raised, as you remember, in an Egyptian royal family. By the queen, or by the princess, the daughter of the Pharaoh. And yet, he didn't consider that his family. His family was the one who raised him, his mother, Jochebed, and Aram, his father. So one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were, and he watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people, and glancing this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian, and he hid him in the sand. And the next day he went out, and he saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" And then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." Now, I noticed something about Moses right here in just this section. I know he's somebody that tries to rescue, tries to help the underdog, and God had wired him that way. And he wires people today just like he did with Moses. He gives them tendencies and giftedness to function in the way that he desires and has planned for them to function. And we may not be fully aware of them, but we find ourselves gravitating to certain things and certain people and certain circumstances, and God is revealing his heart through us, through those. I know for me, I always gravitated toward the underdog or the oppressed or those that were being bullied or things like that. I would always gravitate to help them. And I got in a lot of trouble for it because I only knew one way to help. And it wasn't the right way. But my heart was right. My motives were right. My desires were right. And I never knew I was wired that way till later in life. Because I was called to be an under-shepherd. To watch out for people, those that are hurting, those that are oppressed, that kind of a thing. But I didn't know how to do it. Same thing goes on here with Moses. So let's pick it up again. So it says that Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." And so when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and he went to Midian. And Midian was established, of course, by a man by the name of Midian, who was the son of Keturah. And Keturah happened to be the concubine or wife of Abraham. And so it was his son. He established his place, and Moses fled there. Now, this part of this story is told in two other places, at least. In Acts 7 and Hebrews chapter 11. And I want to touch on Hebrews 11 this morning. So turn there, if you would. Hebrews chapter 11. If you don't want to turn there, I'll read it to you. But it's in Hebrew 11, verse 24. It says, "By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter." Now there's a lot of privileges to that. But he refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. And you know what Moses was referring to, or God was referring to here, as he talked about a short time? He was talking about Moses' entire lifetime. See, he could have lived in luxury, sin, having the best the world had to offer. And so he chose, it says here, he chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for the rest of his life. He made a value judgment. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt. So he looked at one side, all that Egypt could offer him, and the other side he looked at persecution because of the name of Christ, and he chose that because he was looking ahead to his reward. And by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger, and he persevered because he saw him who is invisible through eyes of faith. And faith was a relationship. He had a relationship with God by faith the same way that we do today. Now, when it says that he made a value judgment, or I said he made a value judgment, Jesus has something to say about that in Matthew's Gospel. In chapter 6, in Matthew 6, beginning in verse 24, this is what Jesus said. No one can serve two masters. In other words, I can't have two lords in my heart. I can't have the Lord Jesus as Lord and anything else as Lord. Whether it be money or an individual or a position or a thing, that can't rule and reign. Only one. No one can serve two masters or two lords. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And then in verse 21 he says this, for where your treasure is, in other words, what you value, what your treasure is, or where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So, what we value affects our life. And it determines our spiritual temperature. And when I say spiritual temperature, I mean our fervency, our zeal, our love are determined by what we value. So, would we like to love the Lord more? Would we like to have a greater fervency and a greater zeal for God in our hearts? We want a greater passion for Him. Then we value Him, and we allow Him to be Lord of our life. And we make choices day by day to allow that to happen, to yield to Him, and make that conscious choice to value the Lord in our heart. And as we do that, that relationship with Him is set aflame. There's a burning heart within us. So, this type of thing is mentioned about this relationship. It's mentioned in a couple other passages I want to look at. One is in the book of James. It's the 4th chapter and the 4th verse. And James says to some people, he says, you adulterous people. Now, someone who's in adultery has left his first love, right? And they're bonded together with someone else. And so he looks at the people and he says, you adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is hatred toward God? And anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. That's a similar thing to what Colossians chapter 3 says. It says, since you have been risen with Christ, referring to believers. Since you have been risen with Christ, set your heart, set your affection, set your values upon the things above. And set your mind upon the things above. The things that you think about, the things that you desire, the things that you pursue. What's most important to you, set them on the things above. And so, as we do that, that love for God, that zeal, is increased in our hearts and in our lives. And God desires that. That's why He chose a person out of the world. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, then Moses, and a nation, the Israelites, now a church. In order to bring people into relationship with Him, that He can have a loving relationship with us that will go on past this human body into eternity with Him. Now, let's pick it up again in Exodus chapter 2, verse 16. In verse 16, it says, now a priest of Midian, that's where Moses ended up, in Midian. And it says, now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. And some shepherds came along and drove them away. But Moses got up and he came to their rescue and he watered the flock. And there he is again. He's rescuing someone. And so when the girls returned to their father Ruel, and by the way, in chapter 3, he's referred to as Jethro. But Jethro means His Excellency, is perhaps his title, but he's called here Ruel. So when the girls returned to Ruel, their father, he asked them, why have you returned so early today? And they answered, an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. And he even drew water for us, and he watered the flock. And he says to them, he says, where is he? And he asked his daughters, why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat. In other words, I got 7 children, 7 daughters. They're not married yet. And here's this man that steps up and rescues you. Why didn't you bring him home? You know. Now, the book of Acts in the 7th chapter, let's visit that for a moment. Acts chapter 7. I want to begin in verse 5. Well, I think I'll skip that and go to verse 17. Verse 17. As the time drew near for God to fulfill his promise to Abraham, the number of our people in Egypt greatly increased. And then another king who knew nothing about Joseph became ruler of Egypt. And he dealt treacherously with our people. And he oppressed our forefathers by forcing them to throw out their newborn babies so that they would die. At that time, Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. And for 3 months he was cared for in his father's house. And when he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own. And Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was powerful in speech and in action, in word and deed. He was powerful. And when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his fellow Israelites. And he saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, so he went to his defense, and he avenged him by killing the Egyptian. And Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. Now notice that. He knew that he was called by God to rescue them. He had the call right. All right? But God had to prepare the messenger. He had to prepare Moses. He wasn't ready yet. Now the next day Moses came upon the 2 Israelites who were fighting, and he tried to reconcile them by saying, men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other? He's a peacemaker. But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, who made you ruler and judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday? And when Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner, and he had 2 sons. Now, in Acts chapter, this same chapter 7 and verse 5, it tells us a little bit more. It says, God spoke to him in this way. Your descendants, he's talking about Abraham here actually. He's talking about a covenant that Abraham had made. He says, God spoke to him in this way. Your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. And he's using that as a round number. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, God said, And afterwards they will come out of that country, that's Egypt, and will worship me in this place, which is Canaan. So, did the people, the Israelites that were in Egypt, did they know that God was going to rescue them? Had they been promised that? Yes. They knew that. So all the time, they're being persecuted, and they're suffering, and they're being oppressed. They're in Egypt, and they're going to be crying out and so forth. They had the promise of God that He was going to rescue them. But it's been almost 430 years. Now, do we have the promises of God? Has God given us very great, precious promises? And some of you have been waiting for a long time for those promises to be fulfilled. Jesus has promised He's coming back. He's going to take us home. You've been waiting for a while, have you, for that? I know I have. Close to 40 years, getting close to it. I've been waiting for the Lord to come back. But He's not back yet. And He may not come back before I pass on. So I'll swing out into eternity, holding on to that very great and precious promise. See, holding on to the very great and precious promises of God is living by faith. And as I live by faith, I tap into what God said is sufficient, which is His amazing grace. And as I am touched by His grace, His life, I'm strengthened. And so I can live as He desires me to live in this world. Even though I don't receive the promises. Hebrews 11 talks about that. There's many that did not receive the promises of God. But it didn't matter. They lived as strangers and foreigners in this land. We're in it, but we're not of it. Now, in Exodus chapter 2 again, in verse 19, the girls tell their father, Ruel, that they were rescued from the shepherds by this Egyptian. And he even drew water for us and watered the flock. That sounds a whole lot like Jacob, I believe. Jacob did a very similar thing. And so their dad says, where is he? He asked his daughters, why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat. And Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. And Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, I have become an alien in a foreign land. And then it says in verse 23, during that long period, the king of Egypt died, the Israelites groaned in their slavery, and they cried out. And their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God, and God heard their groaning, and He remembered His covenant. It's the covenant I just read to you. Or excuse me, I didn't read that part of it. That He remembered His covenant with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob. And so as they cried out, God remembers the covenant. Now, it's not like He forgot, but it's time to act on that covenant. God had a specific time when He was going to act. And that's in Genesis 15, beginning in verse 12. And I'll read that to you. Here's the covenant that God made with Abraham. And it says this, verse 12, as the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. And then the Lord said to him, know for certain that your descendants, Moses and the rest of the Israelites, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own. Now, friends, are you strangers in a country not your own? We're to live like that. And they will be enslaved, and they will be mistreated 400 years. And again, that's a round figure. It'll actually be 430. So did they know that they were going to be enslaved and mistreated? Yeah, they did. They knew that there was a covenant there. But I will punish the nation, that's Egypt. They serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions. Did that happen? Yeah. You, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age, Abram. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here to Canaan, for the sin of the Amorites has not reached its full measure. The sins of the Amorites have not reached its full measure. See, God gave the Amorites a certain time to repent. And He's going to allow this to go on. And when its time is up, that God will act to come down and deliver the Israelites out of Egypt, but not until that time comes. So God knew what He was doing, had a purpose and a plan for this. And in, I don't know, this might be one of the reasons why as well. In Genesis 14:13, remember when Abram was going to look for Lot, who'd been taken by some other kings in the area? And he goes to get Lot, and it says that one person escaped. And it says one who had escaped came and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. Now Abram was living near the great trees of Mamre the Amorite, a brother of Eshcol and Aner, all of whom were allied with Abram. So here's an Amorite that does a good deed for Abram and helps him find Lot. And God extends mercy to the Amorites. And so that time had been exhausted yet. You know, there's a lot of things that God is doing. You know, I can do maybe a couple of things at the same time. I can walk and chew gum. You ever tried to juggle? You know, if you don't know how, you can maybe do it with 2. You know, it might even do it with 3 for a couple of moments. But what about, I don't know, billions? And I wonder about God sometimes and all that He's got going on. He's moving in this person's life and that person's life. And all these circumstances and situations, He seems to work it all out real smooth. You know, He makes things happen. And He's actually doing that. He's the author and perfecter of whose faith? All of us. Right? And so He cultivates our trust in Him. And He's working in your life at the same time He's working in my life. And you know, I can't grasp that. I can't put my head around the awesomeness of God. And then He says, is anything too hard for the Lord? You know, is His arms too short? You know, like that alligator that's trying to pay the bill, you know, that commercial. You know, are God's arms shortened? No, they're not. He can do all of this. He's an amazing God. Do you care? Do you care? Do we think about it? So, to finish this thought. Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. And when the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces of slaughtered animals. That's how they made the covenant. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants, I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Raphites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. And by the way, they're all enemies. It doesn't say that, but these are their enemies. And so he gives them all this land. That'd be like God sending us to a neighborhood, and everybody in that neighborhood didn't want to know the Lord. They were all, in darkness. Or putting us in a job where all the people that we're working with are in darkness. See, we all want to be around lights, don't we? We want to be around people that are encouraging and so forth. But where's light needed? In dark places, right? And so he's going to take them. Another name for this is Canaan, but another name for it is what? It's the land of the abundant life. Now, how are they going to have abundant life when they're surrounded by all these adversaries? Well, God's going to move them out, but he's not going to move them out all at once. He's got reasons for it. And they're going to have victory the same way we have victory in this life down here. It's by faith. That's the way we partake of God's grace. And so the abundant life is not something we just live in heaven. The abundant life is something we're living down here. We're to partake of God's divine nature. And we do that through this relationship that we have with him. We partake of his divine nature. We come to the throne of grace, his word of grace, and his spirit of grace. We partake of him. Do we earn it? Can't do it. Can't earn it. No, we can believe. And that's what God calls us, to believe the very great and precious promises of God. That's like you get up one day and you're all anxious. And so you go to the throne of grace and you begin to pray, Lord, I'm just filled with anxiety. I need your grace today. And God says, I give grace to the humble. I humble my heart before you, Lord. I yield to you. And I come and I partake of your grace, Lord. Not arrogantly, but confidently. And I thank you, Lord. You get up off your knees and you walk. And you realize you get peace. Because God keeps his promises. And so what you've done right there is you've partaken of his divine nature by fleeing to the very great and precious promise of God. And that's how we're to do it. Now, it's not a formula. It's not like, it sounded like a formula, but it's not. See, because we can't do that effectively in any other way other than through relationship with him. In other words, it's a hard thing. It's not like, well, I humble myself down, now I'm confident. No. It's we're entering into with our heart. It's a relationship with God by his Spirit. So, back to Exodus, and we'll go through a couple other things. Now it says that Moses agreed to stay with his father-in-law to be Ruel, who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. And Zipporah gave birth to a son, named him Gershom. And verse 23 says, during that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery, and they cried out. And their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. And God heard their groaning, and it said he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And so God looked on the Israelites, and it says he was concerned about them. Now, when it says he was concerned about them, it means he was considering them. He was considering them, and he was going to act on their behalf to help them. And the reason why is because he loved them. Now, you might think, if he loved them, why did this have to take so long? Now, I know he made a promise, and he wasn't going to intrude upon the time of mercy for the Amorites. But couldn't he make things a little easier? What do you think? Could God make it a little easier? You know what he's doing? He's working on the people. Could he make it a little easier for us? Got people in here that have raised children? Is the best thing to do is to make it easy on them? To just be their friends? Give them whatever they want, when they want it? Need some money? Hey, my wallet's over there. Just grab it, take what you need. Is that the best way to raise kids?
No.
Tribulation worketh perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope or confidence. And that doesn't disappoint because the love of God is shed abroad in our hearts. We train and we teach through making things not always the easy way with our children. Now down here, sometimes we're tempted to do that, make it easy. Now, you might make it a little more challenging for your children, but we never do it without doing it in love. That's like when you spank your kids, you say, well, it hurts me more than it hurts you. Not in the same place. You know, when we need to do that. Gosh, you can hardly say that in this world that we live in down here. They say, oh, you're beating your kids. You know, I'm not getting into child beating, but we discipline our children. We don't discipline, we don't love them.
Amen.
They're going to grow up twisted and spoiled. You know what spoiled is? You like to eat spoiled food? Well, we give off a fragrance, we give off a flavor. When people partake of us in relationships with us. And the people that are giving off the right flavor, so to speak, are people that have been through some things and have held on to the Lord. If you haven't been through anything and held on to the Lord, then you're going to give off a spoiled flavor. And nobody wants that. Do it? So, the difficult things God goes through, and He knows you're going to go through difficult things. Sometimes it's so hard. We cry out to God. And that's a good thing. God wants you to cry out to Him. He wants you to come to Him. And sometimes it takes that before we'll come. Before we'll really come. I mean, with our hearts. And lay our hearts before Him. And then we will allow Him to begin to transform us. Not just in the way that we think. I think we can turn Christianity into a knowledge thing. But it's not just the way that we think, but it is that, but it's also the way that we behave. The value judgments that we talked about earlier. The value judgments that we make every day in our life. And sometimes we make a lot of judgments and a lot of decisions and we don't consider value. Is this the right thing to do? Who do I belong to now? I belong to you, Lord. Probably not the right thing to do. Looks like it'd be fun, looks like it'd be enjoyable, but I want to choose rather to be with you and do what pleases you. You know, that kind of a value judgment, you know, this is the best thing to do, this isn't. That's value judgments. And I believe that the Lord wants us to have values that honor Him. Don't you? Values that honor Him. As we value what God values, there's something that happens inside in our heart. Our heart begins to be one with God's. We're in step with Him. We're in accord with Him. Galatians 5 says, if you're filled with the Spirit, stay in step with the Spirit. If you live by the Spirit, rather. If you live by the Spirit, stay in step with the Spirit. And that's what God is saying. I want you to have your heart in alignment with mine by making value judgments, by trusting in me, staying in this relationship with me. I will put my desires within you. And then we'll be dynamite in this world by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father, I know that your word blesses us, but as hearers of the word, that's only part of it, Lord. You said it's the doers of your word that are blessed. And it's not doing in our effort, but the obedience that you are looking for is the obedience that comes from faith, which is that relationship with you. So, Father, may we present ourselves to you, make the value judgments day by day that you call us to make. And, Father, guide us in that path of righteousness for your name's sake, and be honored and glorified through our lives. In Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. God bless you guys. Have a great day in the Lord. Thank you.